Om Tat Sat. Welcome to Gyan Bhakti channel from Swami Nikhilananda. My humble prostrations to the all-pervading Brahman, to my worshipful Gurudev, Swami Jyotirmayananji Maharaj, to Ram Parivar and all sages and saints, and to each of you divine soul watching today's satsang. Currently we are studying the holy scripture, Mysticism of the Ramayana. Commentary is by my Guruji, Swami Jyotirmayananji Maharaj, narrated by myself, Swami Nikhilananda. So, in yesterday's satsang, we had started the story of Pratap Bhanu and how a sage called Ekatanu had taken complete confidence, and Pratap Bhanu was asking for unobscured rulership for many kalpas. So let's continue from there. The sage said that certainly all this was possible for the king. However, to be perfectly secure, the king would have to bring all the brahmanas or the priest class of the time under his control so that none of them could even curse him for any reason. But how can I bring the brahmanas under my control? Asked Pratap Bhanu. The impostor sage, who was not really a sage at all, replied, I have a wonderful plan. All you have to do is invite thousands of Brahmins to your place every day for 1 whole year, and I, disguised as your priest, will continue to cook for them. Thus, due to your generosity, you will have all the Brahmins indebted to you and under your control. The king thought this was an excellent plan and allowed himself to fall asleep, happily dreaming of the ages of unobstructed emperorship that awaited him in the future. While the king was sleeping, the demon Kalaketu used his magical powers to transport Pratap Bhanu away from the forest and back to his royal palace. He also kidnapped Dharmaruchi, the priest and the minister of Pratap Bhanu, and sacredly took his place in the palace. So what a plan they played. When the king woke up, he was greatly surprised to find himself on his own royal bed, and he thought, how supremely blessed am I to have a sage with such powers as my benefactor. After 3 days, Kalaketu, in the guise of the priest, came before the king and reminded him of the plans that he had made in the forest. The king thought that the priest was Ekatanu in disguise, and he was so honored that that sage, who had vowed never to come to a city, had broken his vow just to confer on him the boon he had requested. Immediately the king invited thousands of Brahmins for a feast. After the food was served and prayers were recited, the Brahmins eagerly reached for the tasty-looking dishes spread before them. However, before they could take a bite, an ethereal voice rang out through the hall saying, O Brahmins, do not touch that food. Great harm will come to you if you eat it. It contains human flesh, the flesh of Brahmins. Thinking that the voice had certainly come from the heavenly world, the Brahmins jumped up and, overpowered with immense rage, cursed the king. O foolish king, may you, along with all your family and race, turn into terrible demons. That voice actually came from Kalaketu himself. From the start, he had schemed with the impostor sage to cook human meat in the food, thus giving the Brahmins cause to curse the king. Overjoyed that the scheme had been successful, the demon then used his magic to disappear along with all the food he had prepared. The king raced into the kitchen and saw that the priest and all the food had vanished. Realizing that he had been tricked by the sage, he came back and told the entire story to the Brahmins. Although he begged for mercy, the curse could not be withdrawn. As a result of that curse, in course of time, Pratap Bhanu was born as Ravana, a demon king having 10 heads and 20 arms, endowed with immense powers. The younger brother of the king, Arimardana, who had always encouraged the deeds of the king, became Kumbhakarna. a terrible demon of gigantic size. His minister and priest Dharmaruchi became Ravana's youngest brother Vibhishana. Because Dharmaruchi had never given his consent to any of the plotting of the king and was implicated merely by association, his incarnation was in the form of a pure hearted demon who was eventually of great assistance to Rama in overcoming Ravana and Kumbhakarna. Besides giving another pretext for the incarnation of Rama and his demon brothers, this story about Pratapabhanu provides mystic insight into the demoniac tendencies that arise in the human personality. As the story suggests, Pratapabhanu was a good man, but he was not reflective, and thus he was easily lured by the temptations of power. Even though he was not directly at fault in the plot to deceive the Brahmins, his egoistic desires got the best of him and eventually led to his downfall. Hidden in the unconscious mind of the king was the desire to seek egoistic power and glory. Although the king was virtuous externally, in his unconscious there was the seed of intense pride and delusion, and bad association brought this out. Thus, satsanga is the key to good association, or satsanga is the key for our progress. Although the longing for invincibility and immortality in this physical body seems quite reasonable from the point of view of the masses, it actually is born of ignorance or avidya. The idea that you will have increasing happiness if you continue to live on and on in the same physical body and that you would secure all your desires is also wrong. Your real identity lies not in the body but in the spirit. Perpetuating the bodily existence does not mean mental advancement, and that is what the true happiness of your spirit depends upon. So, an aspirant should not seek to perpetuate the senses of individuality, but rather to promote that state in which individuality dissolves. So, humility, compassion, just dissolving ourselves. Anything that you achieve in the realm of time and space will pass on, it will last only for a short time. Liberation from the fetters of time and space should be our goal. If we do not work for that goal, we become prey to the demoniac forces that lurk within the forest of our unconscious. Any longing for immortality in the physical body is demoniac because it opposes the laws of the spirit. An intense identification with the physical body keeps one confined in the realm of duality. In the mental process, it is confined in that realm. One's spiritual energy becomes perverted and demoniac. So these qualities then they continue to assert themselves. King Pratapabhanu represents an individual with the highly rajasic or restless mind. The mind in a rajasic state has two choices. Either it can sublimate rajas into sattva, which is harmony, purity and balance, or it can let rajas degenerate into tamas, which is dullness and delusion. If it moves towards tamas, it becomes demoniac. If it moves towards sattva, it becomes divine. So in that rajasic or materialistic environment, we have two options, and thus the choice becomes very important. For that reason, satsanga is always encouraged because that takes us towards sattva, whereas intoxication and getting into delusion draws us into tamas, which should be avoided if we are to progress. So, chasing the boar is symbolic of losing one's reason and moving towards tamas or delusion. The king should have left the chase when he knew that the animal was just leading him on and on into the deep forest. However, he would not let go of his pride and he pursued the boar until he was lost. At that time, because of his negative karmas of the past, he was unable to distinguish between a real ascetic and a fraud. His mind was easily led by soft words and external show. As the eventual partnership of this pseudo sage and the king revealed, the Rajasic mind of the king was being irrevocably dragged down by Tamas, although by deceit. So, therefore, we have to be very careful in choosing proper company and not letting greed and power overpower our good faculties. This is Swami Nikhilananda. We will continue this story tomorrow. Om Tat Sat.